All right, good morning. I am Shannon Lemon with the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce, and you are participating in our equity brief, which is conversations on how we can innovate in times of change. And so much is going on. We are in week whatever of our COVID situation, pivoting, reorienting, and preparing for recovery, as well as reimagining and moving forward. So today we were going to continue with our theme on innovation. We have a wonderful guest with us today, and we're going to talk about innovating and leading with urgency and vision. And I always like to say that we have been focused on complex things. All the easy decisions were made a long time ago. So we all have what it takes. We have complex minds to solve these complex challenges. So welcome. In the chat session, I encourage you to open up your chat and just introduce yourself to one another and basically just say, what are you excited about in this time of change? None of the work that we do is possible without our sponsors. So we want to recognize Bremer Bank, who is our presenting sponsor. And although we cannot be in the room with the Science Museum, we thank the Science Museum for their support and sponsorship. We have program sponsor with the Bush Foundation, powering equity and inclusion throughout the region. We have corporate sponsors, Anderson Corporation, Anchor Paper, Flint Hills Resources, Land O'Lake, and Mille Lacs Corporate Ventures, Red Path and Company, Travelers, and Excel Energy. We also have contributing sponsors, Sunrise Banks and University of St. Thomas. Thank you to each and every one of them. We are working in partnership to make sure that during this equity brief, we lay a solid foundation, we set a context, and we have dialogue, and then we all leave with action. So we have 60 minutes to accomplish all of that. We are in totally wonderfully capable hands with Anika Ward, who is going to introduce our guest and lead us through this discussion.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Again, I want to just share my appreciation with all of you for being in this conversation, for SPAC, Shannon, and Kyle for bringing us all together for this important dialogue. We have been discussing our role and responsibility as leaders in the business, and community for creating a more equitable and inclusive region. And today is our fourth bi-weekly equity brief. We've been focusing on innovation in times of change. It's one thing to be aware of the inequities that we're facing in our community and in our systems and to be disappointed by them. It's another thing to start to recognize and understand a little bit more the role that we played institutionally, historically, and the responsibility that we as leaders have for making a difference, for making something different happen, creating different systems and different outcomes. It's another thing to be able to do that. And that's why we know that we've got the right people at the table for this conversation, because we've continually leaned into this discussion to figure out what can we do. And the questions that people are putting in the chat box when we have dialogue constantly reminds me that people want to move to, they're really interested in the history, they're really interested in what's happening today, and they really want to know, you all really want to know and have some dialogue about what we all are doing to make a difference. So we've got the right people at the table. We have been continually reminded by our speakers that disparities were designed, the disparities that we are experiencing within our systems and our communities have been designed with intention. They've been baked into the laws, the policies, the practices, the norms that we have built into our financial, our educational, our housing institution, et cetera. And we've been reminded that in order to rebuild more equitable systems, we must bake equity into them with intention, with deliberateness. And so our challenge that we've continued to have in these conversations is to understand the issue and to move to a vision for a better tomorrow, and then to specifically think about the action that we must take, and then to move towards action as quickly as possible. So we've had these wonderful conversations. In April, we heard from Lisa Jones on the 4 frames of leadership. Tanya Jackman-Hampton shared about knowing fear and understanding how fear impacts our systems and our our behaviors, our organizational behaviors and individual behaviors. And then in early May, we heard from Bajang Mua and Maria Sarabia on health equity, and we had a wonderful dialogue about what's happening in our world, in our communities, and the role the role that we have as business leaders to make a difference. Today, excuse me, today I am excited to hear from a leader in innovation. I have been fascinated just in conversation about her role, the role that she plays at her organization, the action that she has taken, and the vision that she is pulling people together around and she's building support for. Stephanie Hams-Betty, excuse me, is Senior Vice President of Innovation Design for the US Bank Innovation Group. She leads the team responsible for providing thought leadership and education on emerging trends, managing the US Bank innovation community, and running the Innovator in Residence program. She's also responsible for the development and execution of innovation engagement programs to promote and grow innovation talent within the company. Much of Stephanie's work focuses on establishing marketing programs for new payment innovation pilots, as well as overseeing growth of the company's market research function. She also oversees implementation of risk management, due diligence, and profitability analysis of new products and market segment introductions, including directing the go-to-market strategy and collaborating with the lines of business on the piloting of new digital tools into their marketing programs. Stephanie's been with US Bank since 2002, formerly as VP of User Experience, then VP of Cross Payments and Innovating Marketing, and has been Senior Vice President of Innovation Design since 2014. She holds a Master's of Education and Professional Development in Secondary English Education and ESL, as well as a Bachelor of Art in English and Women's Studies, both from the University of Wisconsin. And without further ado, I bring you Stephanie. Thank you for being with us, Stephanie.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. And actually, it's always fun to have somebody read your story because you learn ways to improve it. So thank you, Nico. You know, I am so happy to be here to share it because, you know, we have these journeys and along your journey, you learn some things, but often when we share our journey, we even are able to learn more. So thank you for having me here today. My journey started, I've been with US Bank a while and I've had a lot of different roles, and those roles have benefited me. At the heart of what I do is users and how people learn and how they kind of look at their environments. And so I got the opportunity to join this program called Urban Adventure with the United Way. And it was led by Peter Hergard and Mike Huck. And the whole role of this program was really to bring bankers into the community and really help us understand the impact and the role that banking's had. In some cases damaging some systems within communities, and in other cases things that we're doing to try and roll it around. I'm not a native of Minnesota, and honestly at this point in my life, which is about 5 years ago, I was in the thick of raising little kids and honestly had never really thought about myself being part of the community in Minneapolis. Going through this adventure, which literally you hop on a bus with other bankers, and Mike and Peter have constructed this amazing tour of nonprofits and community leaders, and they take you around and they really teach you about what is happening. So to your point, Anika, I learned then and there some of this institutionalized and where the lack of equity was and where the struggles were. And it was very eye-opening. In fact, very often when I got off that bus, I just simply felt ignorant and ashamed because I hadn't really looked at my community. I was watching my kids run around my yard, but it opened my eyes, and it was a very uplifting experience. I don't know if any of you know Peter. If you don't, you need to look this man up. He is an amazing leader in our community who has led quite a bit of change. And more than that, he's written like 3 or 4 books that are just unbelievably inspiring. And in one of those books was, you know, people picking the thing that they owned, their talent, their belief, and bringing that out in the community and kind of using that as a center for them to implement change and do the things that they saw. For me, that was innovation and technology, right? I had been working in design at US Bank. I had this program stuff that we developed at US Bank, and I really wanted to kind of open doorway with that talent in the ways of thinking. Because part of it is, as an innovation, we typically look at the problem. And what is the problem? Who has the problem? How big is the problem? What can we do to solution the problem? And I felt very often in looking at some of these nonprofits and hearing about their struggles that some of that innovative work, some of that innovative thinking could help them think about some new solutions or maybe get more support for the solutions that they were seeking. So, you know, the next thing that led me to was how to bring out some of what was, in a way, innovation program into the community. And I got the opportunity to work with Technovation. And Technovation here in Minnesota is a girls coding program, which is just fabulous. You know, I didn't know it existed when we got presented, and it was kind of a sponsorship opportunity. I said, well, you know, we can do more than just sponsor. We have this innovation curriculum. We've got people who want to jump in and help. The bank supports us in doing that. So we jumped into doing this coding program with the girls. And US Bank put up a specific challenge, and we, you know, had some of the innovation group go out and work with the varying teams. And one of the most striking, you know, I think I'm helping kids create new solutions, new apps. And again, it's that moment of wow, because I've opened myself up into a new experience, going to new places. The very first thing I realized is that not all kids have the same access, right? You know, we were working with some populations in Riverside in the apartments there, and the very first thing was, whoa, they can't go home and code because they don't have the devices. They don't have a laptop at home. They don't have an iPhone at home. You know, we need to centralize it around their school experience. That was different for us. Other programs, right? Everyone can go home. They can do something kind of on their own or with their families. We had one girl who was a Somali immigrant, and she's the one that I sort of think, you know, hit my heart and my soul at the same time, because her family was kind of struggling with her role and what she would be doing in this technology program. And I think her mother actually probably needed her to help at home after school. So she started and then she stopped, and we kind of were trying to see if there was more that we could do. Could we get her laptop? Could we, you know, help in some way? And then one day she came back, and we were so delighted to see her. And so, you know, as we're working, I was just kind of asking her, you know, like, are you here? You know, can you stay? And she was saying yes. And her mom was sitting, you know, just out in the hallway. And she said to me, you know, because I told my mom that if I learn how to code and I get really good at it, I can then get a good job and then I can buy us a house. And that was the moment of bliss for me, where I realized this connection that this child had already made, that this allowed her to do something in the world differently, and it gave her access in a different way. And she had connected that story herself. We didn't tell her that. She put it together, and her mom, you know, was proud and supported it. And, you know, we did our best to work with this child and her family as she created an app solution. In looking at this child and what she was trying to solve for and the solutions she was creating up with for her family, which was really based on some problems that they had in managing money and how to look at their money, it was interesting because we also were working with some kids down at Mayo and their families around technology solutions. And the very difference in how they looked at financial problems and solving into those areas really taught us a lot about that perspective and where the equity is, and actually where the access to a lot of things. You know, the solutions there were about investing money and how can I do more with the money I have versus the children who were struggling. And there was about managing and growing, you know, to get money. And that was where I really dug in to say, okay, how can technology and the skills that we're working with these students really start to uplift them, and what can we do more of? The curriculum that we tested and we learned there is how to scale things too, which was really interesting. And I think when I thought about bringing out the talent that we had and looking at how we bring it differently in the community, it also taught us about looking at the problems from different lenses and not always assuming that it's our lens that we're going to look through that problem, that we have to open ourselves up to say, here's some tools, but you've got to sort of listen in the voice of the people you're working with, because I think sometimes we bring our own baggage when we come in. And the biggest thing here for me was learning about how to listen better and how to bring that up. You know, Technovation Minnesota is a fantastic program, but I also joined technovation.org. and that is the international sort of sister cousin program to Technovation Minnesota. And the thing that was interesting there is I was a virtual judge and actually got to go to one of their world championships because it's an international program. And I love this program and encourage you just to even go look at their website, because the way other countries are bringing in technology to solve problems in their communities is amazing. And it's something that we can learn from, because in a lot of cases, they don't have the infrastructure we do. One of the girl teams that competed was from Nigeria. They didn't have laptops. They had to take a bus or walk 6 miles to a place where they could use laptops in order to do the coding. But they did it because they were solving a huge problem for their community. And 2 of the girls had been severely impacted by it. So when you hear their pitch and you know the lengths that they've gone, and you know how many of the moms donated, and one teacher sold a car to help these girls come to America to compete, you see that this technology and the way that they're trying to influence in their communities is a key thing. So that's another inspiration point for me, which led me to think about Minneapolis College. In Minneapolis College, I really was lucky in that U.S. Bank, my boss, was on the board for the Minneapolis College Foundation. So I got exposed to them in doing some workshops as well as listening to some of the students present. And I realized what a hidden gem Minneapolis College was. Very diverse population. Students are coming from all sorts of backgrounds. They've already accomplished a lot just by walking in the door. The other thing that's kind of unique about Minneapolis College is when you think of a college student, it's typically young. The average age for this population is about 27. So they may have come in, they may have tried college somewhere else, they may have not tried college, and they're just coming in to, get into their career space. This has been a great place for me to learn. One, about equity and where it's just a problem. And when I come back to my community and I think about some of the experiences in my life, you really realize this gap. And I think hearing some of the stories and the ways that the students have brought themselves up and present on it and share that journey made me think, I want to dig in and I want to invest into how do we close it. And I still believe, from all my other experiences with the coding programs and bringing technology forward, and at U.S. Bank, we work with a lot of startups too. You realize how much growth can happen and how much access can happen with this technology. So I joined the foundation. My boss left his seat, and I was very happy and excited to be able to jump into that seat on the foundation board. And working with the foundation director was, how can we grow scholarships and how can we get more community support for the students? I started to think about weight. So when we're trying to fund things and when we have a gap, what are some ways? Well, you can go to a foundation and you can ask them to support and fund a certain program. I went through all the different mechanisms, but I thought about a startup and, how does a startup fundraise early on, and kind of try to bring myself to that mindset. And I thought about being a matchmaker. So Minneapolis College has a pool of resources. They are students with talent. They are getting specific training on technology or nursing or in some cases HVAC, but these are skills and jobs that we need to fill in our communities. And in the case like of my company, and I'm sure many other companies within the Twin Cities, there's not enough tech talent and we can't hire people fast enough. And we have a very big cliff of people who are going to be retiring soon. And so we're going to have even a bigger gap. So I thought about that gap and knowing my company was looking for this talent. And then I thought about the talent sitting at Minneapolis College. So I approached the Chief Technology Officer of U.S. Bank in partnership with the director of the Minneapolis College Foundation. And I said, here's talent, right? These are the students. These are the programs that they're part of. Here's the training they get. Here's the certificates they can get. And then here's U.S. Bank. And here's some of the things we need to fill. And he was very excited about the idea and became the first corporate sponsor for the college with technology scholarships that we could then use to, one, learn and support the students through their education, but also really have that opportunity to bring our employees in and learn about the college and the students and do more to support the programs. Like I don't know, I think we did 10 or 12 lunch and learn sessions where people from, US Bank went over and did, technology training sessions, or this is what Java's like in a corporate setting. But it's where we got to bring our skills and our talent in to help make that skill better for them and give them some real world experience and kind of make the context of how to apply the technology real for them. And then in some cases, we actually brought the students over and learned from them and had talk about their experiences and what we could do to support them. So this was the first time where I realized if we could look for those connection points and help people understand, you have a gap, I have a gap, let's bridge that gap together. And in this case, specifically through technology, because technology jobs pay well. And in some cases, the certificates are things that we're sending our own employees back to get. If we can get somebody quickly educated, quickly certified in some things, we can bring them in and get them working right away. And I think that's probably true for many organizations who are needing to fill technology positions. So with that, I have a shared resource here of Career Karma. And I saw the founder of Career Karma pitch in Silicon Valley, and it gave me goosebumps because their entire program is shaped around building technology skills and giving people access who normally are kept from access. And so it is Equity Leap for them. They have this 12-week program. They have program connections across the country. But what was interesting is that's the point of how you make a place like Silicon Valley, is you have to be very thoughtful and mindful about how you grow that technology talent and then the access to give the technology talent places to work. And I believe, we've got this history of innovation in St. Paul and in Minneapolis. We have a lot of technical needs that we can bring it forward and we can build this kind of tech hub. And so I guess the grand experiment that we've started with Minneapolis College and US Bank is something that I'm really passionate about because I believe that we can make our own tech hub. I believe that we can come up with a way to grow our own technology, talent and to give them access and to sort of, help diversify our companies and help change the voice and the stories in our own companies and bring in this new types of talent. And his program has kind of been, my North Star and the thing I think about when I'm trying to keep connecting the dots. So, we have a lot of large corporations here. I think we've all seen, and there are people that are probably on this call working on, the whole keeping the talent here in Minnesota and what do we do to, help talent stay. I think this is one of the things, is technology and places where I can continue to learn and grow that technology. When you go to the Valley and you're at a hackathon, let's say, you realize how much that is part of their culture and that people are learning together and they're trying this technology together. We have the starts of that. I think we can do more to support it, especially from a corporate view or from, some of the other businesses that need new technologists in their companies. It's not hard to do, and it's amazing that when you engage people in that learning, how much they're going to want to bring back to you as well. I think the other thing to think about is diversity in thought and experiences actually come up with better solutions. And the more that we bring that in and we're able to sort of drive that into our companies, the better products we're going to have, the better services, the better we're going to be able to understand how we become better citizens in the corporate world as well as in our own communities. We definitely, those new perspectives, that little girl who taught me so much basically in, 2 sentences, she changed my life and she changed my perspective on a lot of things. And I think, we've all probably had those moments. But let's drive those moments in for innovation. Let's drive them in to help others and grow some new talent for us. And really, I'm so excited that you're all here, and I'm really looking forward to some of the conversation that we might have today, because honestly, I'm not going to do this alone. And I'm sure all of you can connect or think of new things and help this kind of idea, because I think it's something that, especially within the next 5 years, as we see AI coming forward, as we see new technologies emerge, the demand's only going to increase for us. And so we've got a lot of talent. I think that in some cases just needs for us to come and tap them on the shoulder and bring them in. I don't know if you want me to run through. I've got a kind of a resource page that I put together. These are some places where, you know, if you're excited after this, and I hope that you are as much as I am, these are some local fun programs to really start at the kids level, right? So if we make it part of our learning culture in getting kids into coding, there's lots of places where you can volunteer to, you know, be part of an event that they have, be a virtual mentor, be a virtual coach, be a virtual judge. It is amazing to see their ideas. It is life-changing in some ways because, of course, we have our own assumptions. We have this own way of looking at the world. When you see some of the ideas that these kids come up with, especially at the international scale and the technovation side, it is really amazing how they think about solving problems, and it gives you some great insight and perspective into your own. Obviously, always trying to bring women up in coding. So Hack the Gap is very active here. They do a lot of hackathons. I just saw that they did a virtual one, which was amazing. But that's also a place where you might be able to jump in and mentor and see how you or your teams even or partners could lend a hand. And then I think, yeah, be a mentor. So I love the fact that we have a lot of kind of startup and accelerator communities emerging. On my bus tour with the guys in Urban Adventure, we met Neon, and at that time Marcus Owens was just getting them started. But I love Neon because they're helping people grow businesses. They're giving them the skills of what they need to do to think of a business, to fund that business, to found it and really create a plan around it. They always are looking for volunteers to help. It's a great place to take your talents and plug in and help somebody do more. Lunar Startups, they're also an amazing startup group. They have a lot of events. They're always looking for mentors and volunteers as well. If you go and hear their pitches, I guarantee you, you're going to want to do 10 times more to help them because some of these budding businesses are truly visionary. And then, of course, Women Venture, who's been around for a while, but still is doing a lot to help people fund and find their way either through a career or a new business on their own. But there's a lot of opportunities to engage there. And then, of course, I'm just sharing here the inspiration, which was Career Karma, and the whole idea around using technology to get people focused on options for them. The 21-day challenge, take a look at it. It's super fascinating around how you can use code quickly to help people get into a new career. And then the podcast is one of my favorite stories that is shared out of the organization. It's basically about a mom who, she's a single mom, really struggling. She took the 21-day challenge. She used her own phone to do most of the coding classes. And she ended up getting a six-figure job about doing coding for Stitch Fix, which is just this phenomenal win. And phenomenal in that along the way, she didn't really believe she could do it. And she talked about a lot of how this program helped her. So just sharing some nuggets of places where you could jump in, but we can kind of talk through more of those through the rest of our time today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I so appreciate the work that you're doing, the way you've described it. I wanna just, after hearing you speak, it reminds me that leaders don't often have a personal story that connects them to their why, like why we're passionate about this. And I've heard so many times leaders get up and talk about equity and inclusion. And then the criticism, the feedback you hear from the audience is like, I don't understand what they're passionate about, right? And where their connection to this story comes from. For some reason, that's incredibly inspiring for us to hear, for people to see a leader stand up and say, not just this is what I'm doing, but this is where that came from in me. And I think sometimes that ability to make it personal through telling the story, even for ourselves, helps us to start to identify that space where our passion and a need in community, and our opportunity intersect. The like specific talent we have, or the opportunity or the role we have, creates an intersection for us. And so thank you for starting us off with that conversation. That was really, really helpful. I want to also, I think I'm incredibly interested in the role that you have right now. And I know that, I invite folks to start posting questions on, if you've got questions for Stephanie or things that you want to share in this discussion. But the conversation, about innovation is so fascinating to me, especially from the perspective of you and the role that you sit in, and how you've been able to innovate as part of what you do. So this is part of your job. And so I have a two-part question. One, please share more with us about the role that you play at US Bank and how you're able, the opportunity that you see within US Bank to innovate and create equity within the company and within the community that's impacted by the company.
Sorry, I just swallowed the wrong way. 1 second.
I had my problem with my voice earlier. So that would be the first part of the question that I would have.
Yeah.
To get some thoughts from you about how, in addition to becoming involved in the work that you've so thoughtfully described for us, advice that you might have for other folks about building creative innovations within their.
Well, my boss has frequently always sort of ingrained, Dominic Venturo, who's our leader for innovation, that you start with why. And early on in designing software, I think what led me into user experience, which brought me into innovation, is this users and how people look at things and how they feel things. And it's really that empathy space and understanding. So you might have your own assumption around why something doesn't work or why it's broken, but you will learn some more about that problem when you start to engage people and ask about it. So typically when we're looking at things, and where I think we've had the advantage in helping the company and helping others, in this case, is really listening and paying more attention to what they believe. What are they feeling? What are they experiencing? And being able to kind of drive that. And there are methods and techniques, that we gather through innovation to be able to do that, design thinking, all that kind of thing. But honestly, it's being focused on, really understanding their context. And I think that brings you closer to understanding what their world is or isn't in some cases, right? We make assumptions, we all kind of carry on baggage, but when you start to listen to somebody and you start to see their story unfold, you start to think a little bit more about that solution. And so that's essentially the role, right? For me at US Bank, it wasn't just enough for us to have the innovation team and have the 30-some people or so just doing it. We decided we also needed to create others within the bank to be able to do it. So a lot of our programs of design and empathy and all the things that we kind of teach is really to build that skill set out into the bank so that others are able to do it and others are bringing it into their work. And it's that kind of experience that actually made me think, well, if I'm able to do that in my own company and I'm helping teams get stood up and kind of solve their problems and think about their solutions in new ways, then I definitely want to be able to bring that into my community, because we aren't always really good as humans as saying, I got this thing and it's driving me crazy, there's this problem and I need somebody to help me. But if you reach out and you start to offer those things, it's amazing when somebody else gives you insight into something you've been looking at forever, how your lens will be able to change, or at least you'll get a new insight on it and it can shift. And that's really what I saw when I was out in the community and I was going through and learning about a lot of these programs, in the United Way program, because there very often was like, gosh, first of all, I'm in a big bank, I'm lucky I have a lot of resources, but, you also learn that sometimes it's a simple fix. And boy, so many of the nonprofits, they get so stuck on things that I just kept thinking, boy, I think a lot of this innovation stuff and the way that we look at going to the source and the empathy and kind of thinking different about solutions is just one way that we should just be out there helping, because you'll always get to better ideas if you've got other people helping you that aren't attached to the problem and can give you new ways to look at it.
Thank you. I've got a question from Philomena. In addition to the urban gap with technology, have you explored the rural broadband gap?
You know, I have not. I do know that that's a big thing, especially now with COVID, that has become even greater, obviously, because, you know, as some schools are easily hopped online and we're able to give out laptops and stuff to students, there are a lot of schools that can't even hop online because they don't have access. And I don't understand why we don't just make sure everyone has the internet or has a phone, right? It's just in this world today, when we're able to do that in Africa and other places where there's even less infrastructure than we have, it's mind-boggling. And it's definitely something that I've started to think a lot more about in reading and researching that problem, being home in COVID times, because that was a disconnect, you know, that was new to me. I mean, it should have been obvious, but it wasn't until, you know, you think that some kids are learning just fine and keeping up, but there's whole groups of kids that are, you know, not having any access at this point. And so what's going to happen to them, you know, during this time, and where are their connectors?
Thank you. I've got a question from Patricia. She said, you mentioned that you were inspired by working with and in the Riverside community. Does your program go to other neighborhoods, North Minneapolis, Brooklyn Park, Ridley, West St. Paul, etc.?
Yeah, so the beautiful thing about Technovation, and I think there's other code programs too, is as long as there's like a parent or a librarian or somebody within the school that's willing to sponsor the teams and the program, any school can have it. And if you have schools that you want to get started or you think could get started, you know, send me an email and we will get that connected, because, you know, really what it is as long as they're sponsoring the school, then we can line up other mentors to kind of help the students through and the families through the programs. But it's really open to anyone. You just need that sponsor. Part of it is because then it ensures that the program runs well and that the girls are connected to mentors and all that kind of thing. But if you're interested, I'd love to help you get connected.
Wonderful. And I've got a question from Bethany. Curious if you and or your teams are involved in efforts to close equity gaps in financial literacy and variations in access to financial resources, like investment into small businesses across different communities, especially if someone in an underserved community has a technology idea for a business they are trying to get funded.
Yes, we have a lot of different programs, and that is not my expert space, so I don't want to speak or name them in the wrong way what US Bank does, but we do a lot. And then we have a fintech kind of arm within the innovation team. And so that has connected us to a lot of startups. And mostly from my team's directive, we do a lot of, we'll go out and do lectures to some of those new startups and try to help them think through tools they might need, like how to build a business case, how to do a pitch, how to do storytelling around your idea to sort of help them succeed when they go to those next spaces. We also, you know, try to think about financial education. Part of it is that there's a switch in what is defined as a small business today. Well, and again, after COVID, there's a whole new definition because people are doing gigs or they may have lost their job and they're thinking about starting. So honestly, we are just currently starting to scrub through a list of ideas around how to serve those people who may have had a career job situation, now has changed, but they may want to start their own solution. And their solution might be working, you know, in the Ubers and the GitHubs, and so how to help them from a financial education standpoint, understand how to balance all of those, you know, income pieces that are coming in. Or in the other side, what does it really take for them to think about accessing, or how could they access some of this new funding that is going to be available to start businesses? And like, what do they need to do to be prepared? Because you can definitely see that shift happening now. And I think that there's more to do, you know, from the banking side to help people be prepared. Financial education is a hard one because, you know, we've got lots of information, like millions of pieces of financial education, I think we've struggled with what's the best way to help people access that information and make it accessible. And that's something that, you know, we're currently kind of thinking about too, is how to do better and make sure people have the information they need when they want it, and in the way that they want it too. You know, so much, sometimes, at least for me, when I look at the way that we talk about financial services and the way we describe things, I think it's overly complicated. And I'd like to see us do more to try and humanize that and make it in a language that people really understand, and it's clear to them on what they can do and sort of support themselves with it.
Thank you, Stephanie. I appreciate this question from Shannon, and I look forward to your answer. How has relationships with community college and coding programs changed the way you hire?
Yeah, you know, the community college and the coding programs are new, right? And so I think technology is still new to banking in some ways, which is funny because honestly, we are pretty much, it's underpinnings the technology infrastructure in the way that we have to manage data, but always been sort of banking financial, obviously led first versus technology. So I think we were really good in the beginning when websites were coming on and, you know, thinking about the technologies that were there. But we haven't been so good about keeping up with the emerging technologies and how to be sort of fluid in some way. So, you know, the bank, like everyone, is embracing Agile, and with Agile comes a new way to build and develop. So with that becomes the new way for us to think about talent, because talent isn't necessarily going to come out of a 4-year situation. It's going to come from one of these coding programs or the 2-year college. So we've done some internships in helping, you know, do a better job connecting. And we've done more of reaching out from a technology organization. As the technology group looks to transform, they're forming more relationships. For us in hiring, it's really being specific on the kinds of skills and emphasizing that and what people are going to do with those skill experiences, so that we're kind of leading with here's what we need you to do from like the technology skill, instead of starting out with what I think traditionally has always been what I'm going to say are some of the soft skills and the degree requirements and all of that kind of first. It's more or less trying to get into what you're going to do with those skills. And I think that helps us make a better connection, because then we're really focused on what we want the input and output to be with the employee. So early days of us starting new types of intern programs and new types of, you know, we're trying to consider, you know, is it a project-based program, but some way to onboard people easier from if I've gone out and I've just done the 21-day type of program, but now I'm a really good coder. We want to access that talent as soon as we can, because honestly, our competition is going to. And so we need to work on it, and we know it. And so we are kind of in the early days of how to define what those programs are going to look like. So it's fair and consistent, and we can support it, you know, kind of across all of our organization.
Thank you so much. I've got 1 or 2 more questions. One from James now. In Stephanie, in your view, how can we overcome the unconscious bias people, in quote, investors, have had when the view of our communities across the Twin Cities is that the East Metro is for low wage manufacturing while the West Metro is for high tech? It feels like these lines are falling across how our communities look rather than the potential our communities have. So how can we overcome that unconscious bias?
Right. You know, I don't know exactly, but my belief is, and my own personal experience has been, seeing is believing. And that's why I think we have to do more to, you know, can you host a pop-up event of some of this, you know, these programs? Can we highlight them in different places? So if the tech is on the west and the manufacturing is on the east, can we do something to bring them across and showcase, like, you know, the students from Minneapolis College, you know, who maybe have a new project that they have, or, you know, from St. Paul Technical College. Like, I think we need to do more to sponsor and showcase those things and say, we believe it. We think this is great. And, you know, pop-ups are kind of a thing now anyway. It's a good way to bring people into a moment, to get them to interact, because I think seeing, touching, and feeling always helps us sort of check things out. And I also think that sometimes we get in our own rut and we sit in our own space with our own people, and until we have somebody shake that up for us and we don't get the exposure, we might not. So I'm all about, like, you know, shake it yourself and think about how you can bring groups in or pose things differently, so that you get the exposure. And, you know, reading's great, lectures are great, but honestly, interacting with people and getting that chance to see and learn for yourself, I think, is the biggest way that we can sort of impact change like that.
And I think that brings us to a really important question that Philomena is asking, which is about hiring managers. Because I think I think you're absolutely right. There's this kind of two-ended solution for ending some of these biases. And one is making sure we have new ways to get the right people in front of folks. And then there's another point that's making sure that our hiring managers and the folks that are responsible for that role at our organizations have what they need, have the skills and the supports that they need, and that we're getting the right people in there. So Philomena's question is, how are you preparing your hiring managers who are hiring these students from under-resourced backgrounds, not just for hiring them, but for managing them, I believe.
Yeah, and that is the thing to do, right? Because it's not enough that we can get them hired. If we don't have the space that feels right for them and feels comfortable and supports them in growth and just thriving, we're not going to be successful. So I believe that it's a lot of, so we have these agile sort of view now at US Bank, and we have these open workstations, which I know probably is all subject of question now because of COVID. But I believe too, like my pop-up idea, that the more we can get people not just looking at paper and not just sort of responding to a PowerPoint, and that's kind of my bias from a corporate world, we're always looking at paper and PowerPoints, is to bring them to people, you know, have a mixer, you know, do speed interview, speed hire dating. I think we have to force interaction, and we have to, in some cases, I think, make people feel a little uncomfortable in getting out and having to actually talk to people, not just look at that piece of paper. And for me, I feel like it's creating scenarios where manager, team, everyone has to kind of start to interact and work with more. And I think that's one of the coolest things that I've seen as a change in our company just with Agile, is that you can't sit in your cube and just say no anymore. You actually have to say no across the table from somebody. And it's amazing how quickly people don't say no and how they start to talk more about their thinking. So, you know, I agree. I don't know that we have the solve. I will tell you that my belief in how we do that best, and it's a little bit changed right now given the situation we're in, is that people have to interact and be accountable to people, and we have to start to learn from each other in all sorts of ways. We've got great diversity and inclusion programs that are helping managers learn, but I also think that we need to help them get more exposure from an interaction standpoint, because the more that we're with other people doing other things, it kind of opens up both pathways for, oh, I never thought of it like that, or that was really insightful to me. Because that's just how, I think, naturally how people learn together.
I want to thank you. So I've got one last question for you that would be really interesting for me. As you talk about the work, you and I had a really great conversation about a month and a half ago, thanks to another one of your colleagues at US Bank. And I was struck by, in particular, what I saw as kind of two different perspectives that you held on to in some of the stories that you told and some of the action that you're taking. It felt to me that there was one perspective where you were recognizing that now is a time to lead with a sense of urgency and to move quickly and to shift frames and the ways that your organization acts in order to meet new needs and to reduce some of the issues that people are facing today in the face of the COVID emergency. And then there was this other perspective that you shared that was for me, really about building a vision, this long-term view that you can start to put pieces together for right now. And you shared a lot about that long-term view. I would love to know, you know, the organization that you're with, US Bank, how that has provided, how US Bank has provided the background for you to be able to lead in that way. I'm wondering in particular if there has been conversation about within US Bank about the role that the banking systems has played in some of these inequities, and the responsibility that you all as banking, as US Bank leaders have to make a difference and kind of undo some of these inequities. I wonder if you can share anything about discussions that you all might be having there.
Yes, we have lots of discussions, and I think those discussions are ongoing. I think the first thing is that US Bank encourages us, you know, they give us volunteer time, all that kind of stuff, to just be out in our community because they know it's important. We have a whole community banking connection, which is really about those banking leaders being out in their communities, learning about the communities. We have the community, you know, support and responsibility groups that sort of connect us and help us learn. And I think those are great. And we've really, over the last 2 years, built up our diversity inclusion program. And so we've got more access points for those conversations and kind of for that learning. And even in some cases for what are uncomfortable and hard discussions. I do think, though, it's a very large organization, right? It's an old institution, as are many large companies. And so to shift and be different or do everything different from a new perspective is just, it's a journey. And to change that path is just, it's incremental. I believe that by getting access out there, and I promote the volunteering, and I try to engage anyone and everyone in that company who will go out with me to these things that I do, because I think it starts with the people too, right? So US Bank is great. They allow me to do this. They support it. They talk to me about it. I talk to them about it. But I also think that I have a role. And if I'm given the access and there's if I can go, I'm going to bring what I learned back in. And I think we all have to take some personal responsibility. It's like in our own community, if somebody's hungry, we should feed them, we should do something. I kind of feel like that too within the bank, that it isn't, we're part of a community both within the company and externally. And how can we as leaders do a better job connecting, and in some cases taking the risk, because it is different. You do have to sort of make yourself a little bit more vulnerable, in some cases humble, than what you have been trained to do, right? Managers, we always know the answers. We always got to have this face. There are many times where I don't know and I'm uncomfortable, but I've really started to lean into it, and I'm trying to bring others with me too, because I think, you know, like my colleague Chris, now we've connected on a conversation, we've connected to you, and now we've got others in the bank that we're connecting. I think that that's the other way we do it, because then we make those programs that the bank is implementing and trying to do, we can make them real by being out and bringing some of that stuff back into the bank to help those programs do better and bring us back out into our communities to actually do better.
Stephanie, I want to thank you so much for being here with us this morning and having this conversation with us. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your humble and gracious sharing with us today. I think I am inspired and excited by the example you said of starting with your own story and grounding your leadership within your, and making it personal, because it is personal for many, many.
Right.
We want to see that it's personal for the leaders that are in charge of our systems and organizations and institutions. So that is inspiring and exciting. I'm excited to hear that you have been in this large institution, this historic institution, having these types of conversations and having the space to lead in this way. I encourage all of the leaders on the line to, number one, think about the story, think about how you're grounded in your own story in this work. And then two, to think about the ways that you can lead based on your story and based on what what moves you and what you're passionate about, and the intersection between that piece and the need and the position and the opportunity you have to make a difference, make an impact on our communities and on the world. And then I want to leave us with, before I turn it over to Shannon, just a reminder that I think it's important for us to remember that as we're leading, to lead with a sense of urgency, because things are happening now that are scary, that are unusual and concerning, that if we don't address, make some real impacts to make a difference right now, it could lead to some real problems in our future. But also to hold that sense of urgency with a strong vision for a brighter future. And so while we're working to kind of, in some ways, fill holes, we also have to work to build this bigger, brighter opportunity for the future. And the way, Stephanie, you're leading and pulling people in and inviting people in to a vision that you have, that all of us can be excited about, because there's nothing that's not inspiring about building Minneapolis as a tech hub and getting businesses aligned around that. You're absolutely right. We're full of opportunity in our cities, in our state, and recognizing that and leveraging that to pull attention into people who have the talent and just need the exposure and the opportunities. It's fantastic. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you all for being on this call today. And I'm going to turn it over to Shannon with that.
Thank you so much, Anika. And thank you, Stephanie, as Anika's saying, for sharing your personal story and for really challenging us in many ways. I love many of the things that you said, just in terms of the epiphany of how your world was dramatically different than the worlds around you. The very fact that you had to step outside of your comfort zone, the way that you've incorporated your learning into your operations and driving innovation. It's all very important, because change happens through the courage of people, and we change because we choose to change. And as we build this community of champions for equity, it is about looking at systemic structures. It's about how you deploy best practices in diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it is also about a personal choice and having a community of people who are making that choice so that together we can have impact. And if one person in an organization catches fire, many others around them can catch fire, and together you can actually transform how business is done, which is our goal. And there are three things that we think are a priority at the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce. One is diversifying leadership at all levels of our organization, from the C-suite to the board, throughout all levels of management. Number two, how are we investing in advancing diverse populations? We can hire, we can retain, but are we investing in advancing and making sure that people of color and other diverse segments are actually a part of the fabric of the organization? And the third is what we talk about a lot, which is that culture of inclusion, that sense of welcoming and belonging. All of those levels and areas of focus require people who are on the front line, who wake up and make a choice to change. So Stephanie, you're really emphasizing how an individual can transform and how through innovation we can achieve these goals. Thank you all for participating. Our next equity brief is on June 3rd. If any of you would like to get involved in helping businesses grow and having an impact, we will share the information that Stephanie provided. But this last week, we actually, the St. Paul Chamber, in partnership with the City of St. Paul, launched a new program called Pay It Forward. So if you go to St. Paul Chamber /Pay It Forward, you will see how you and others in your organization can volunteer with SCORE to help support businesses in our community. So thank you all for what you're doing. Thank you all for joining, and have a great morning.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone. Well done, Stephanie, Anika, Shannon.